Mental health is critical to every aspect of our lives. It affects how we think, how we feel, our moods, our behavior, our actions. It impacts how we will deal with stress, our relationships, and our choices. So it's absolutely vital to have a functional, productive, and meaningful life, that our mental state should be healthy. But what exactly is a mental state? What does our psyche look like? And when you talk physically, you can say an arm is functioning well or it's been injured, God forbid. But what exactly and how does that play itself out on the mental level, in the areas of our psychological, emotional, and behavioral lives? And what can we do when there are challenges? So please join me in this important talk, how to cope with mental health challenges. Hi, this is Simon Jacobson, and we will be speaking about how to cope with mental health challenges. This program is dedicated by Alice Harron in memory of her father, Mayor Jacob Harron. Mental health. What is mental health? So mental health is generally categorized as being that part of ourselves that deals with how we think, how we feel, our moods, as well as our behavior and our actions. It impacts every aspect of our lives, dealing with stress, relationships with ourselves and with others, how we make choices, how we make decisions. So it's not just enough for a person to have a healthy body, arms, legs, physical functions, but also our mental health, which includes both the psychological, the emotional, and the behavioral. But what exactly is mental health? And what exactly is the mental state of a human being? And of course, then, what is the healthy version? And what is one that is not so healthy? And what can we do about it? There's no person on earth that is immune to this question. It affects us all. And indeed, how we deal with it will impact every aspect, literally, of our lives. Statistics, if you go by statistics, show that 1 in 5 people, the population of the world, have some type of mental health challenge. Obviously, it goes from the mild to the moderate to the severe. And there are names given to particular diagnoses of different mental health issues that are actually considered an illness or a disease, whether it's forms of depression or anxiety disorders, whether it's schizophrenia or bipolar or borderline, and quite a few others. There's controversy around it as well. Is it actually definable always in such an absolute way, or is there room for so-called overlap? How much of it is controlled by a person and how much needs intervention? So being that I am not speaking here from the perspective of a medical professional, so I'm not going to address the clinical side of it, which may require going to a psychiatrist, going to a doctor, going to a competent medical practitioner, getting diagnosed, and listening to what they advise, which is often a combination, if a person indeed has something, a combination of medication and therapy. And there are different variations of that as well. So I think that goes without saying that anyone's dealing with anything that is affecting your life, in some way compromising your life, it's important to get that covered. If indeed the doctor or the professionals say this is something that you need to work out through yourself or with therapists or with your mentors, or so by all means. But it's important because in case there is something, because the fact is it could be a result of something chemical and biological, it could be something genetic from family, something running in the family, and it could also be to life experiences, abuse, trauma, and other experiences that may have triggered and may have caused these challenges that we have. I want to speak about it more firstly from the internal perspective. What exactly is mental health? Which really means what is a human being and what defines our psyche. And when there are challenges, the important things to do to address them, which may include also going to a doctor. But there are many other steps as well that can be tremendously helpful in keeping that equilibrium. So let's begin with this. This may sound morbid, but I think it's a good place to begin. Someone who is not alive, I don't want to use the word corpse, but someone that's dead doesn't have any mental health issues. There's no anxiety, there's no depression, there's none of that. So it's clearly a part of life. I know it sounds obvious, but I think it's important to state, because life, by definition, is pulsating, is movement. And anything that's moving is always going to be subject to changes. So the idea of having mood changes, the idea of being in different states of mind, having different type of reactions, is completely normal to the human condition, because we are not static individuals. For example, you throw up an object in the air, gravity will always affect it, it will always fall down. And if you do it exactly the same way, it will always fall the same way. Completely predictable. Literally like clockwork. Cause and effect. What we call the billiard ball effect. You hit a billiard ball with the same intensity, the same angle. So the effect is always going to be the same. We are not that way. It doesn't work that way. There are parts of our system that work that way. Obviously, if a person, for example, will not eat, they'll be hungry. You cut yourself, it will bleed, and then it will clot. So there are also many aspects, biological and chemical reactions in our systems. But when you talk about our mental health, you wake up in the morning, sometimes you'll just feel very good, and sometimes you may not feel so good. So let's make it clear that these changes are very much part of the human being. The question is why? So let me begin with a verse that says, the book of Proverbs, beautiful verse, also very poetic, that the soul of a human being is the flame of God, is a divine flame. In other words, the soul is comparable to a flame. Look at a flame, restless, constantly flickering, constantly on the move. In the words of the mystics, and I'm going to call them the psycho-spiritual mystics, psycho as being psychological/spiritual, and for the record, psychology is the study of the soul. Another verse is used from the book of Ezekiel that says, and the energy ran and returned. Hachayis rotze v'shuv is the Hebrew expression. What does that mean? That means energy, by definition, runs to and fro. Like the symbol of lightning, the positive and the negative. Tension and resolution. Look at a cardiogram. What does a healthy heart look like? A wave. Peaks and valleys. But if it's healthy, it's balanced. If it's unhealthy, there'll be extreme peaks and extreme drops, extreme valleys. So life, by definition, is a pulse, is a movement, a constant movement of contraction and expansion, of exhaling and inhaling. That is a healthy human being. Look at a newborn child, you see their chest heaving up and down. Everything is so clear, there are no toxins yet. So the breathing is very smooth, literally like a pump. So there's a pulsating energy in all of existence and within us, which is a necessary component in what is called health. If a person, for example, has no tension at all, they're always like animal bliss, complete peace, there's usually something wrong. If a person is constantly in a state of tension and stress and anxiety, there's also something wrong. So the first thing is to establish what exactly is the healthy state. So then you can juxtapose and say, okay, here's the issue here. So the mere fact that we have mood changes is completely normal. It should be that way. Just as when you go outside and it's a hot day, your body's going to react one way. If it's a cold day, it will react another day. That's the way it should be. If it doesn't change reaction, then there's a certain numbness. It's not feeling the temperature. It's not feeling the atmosphere. And the same thing is mentally. You meet people. Of course it's natural that different people you're going to have different reactions to. People you really love or love you, who treat you very nicely, in a normal person there's going to be a reciprocal reaction. If someone treats you in the wrong way, you can decide how you're going to treat them back, but it's not necessarily going to have the same reaction. So all this is part of the normal wear and tear of life that we need to be aware of because, and I've heard this from people, some people don't like the idea. They'd rather just have, I want to just be a predictable mood. I want to know exactly what's going to happen. But that's not the way life works. And this is no matter how healthy you are. There are always going to be things in life that are going to shake some people. The question is how you navigate through that, which of course we're going to address. But let's first establish that concept, the flickering, restless soul. That is you. Now, in normal and healthy circumstances, this is part of how we ride the waves of life, where there'll be ups and downs, there'll be setbacks, but we know we're resilient enough and we know how to navigate. But where do problems begin? So they can begin in different ways. They can be chemical and biological. Some people are born with certain chemical imbalance, a different chemical mixture, makeup, which in fact affects their composure, affects their moods, affects their life. There are too many variations. And it depends, again, how much it affects you. The fact that we all have different chemical makeups, that's fine. The question is what impact it has. If a person, for example, is experiencing a disproportionate amount of depression and anxiety, and it's not just part of the cycle, that's when you want to intervene. You want to do something about it. Especially if it's affecting your life. If it's not affecting your life, some of us can get through it, but it's also important to determine, are you just denying it? Are you just numbing it? Are you ignoring it? And it is affecting you, but you're just denying its effect? Or indeed, you're able to get through. We all have certain things that we can just manage, just like it is with physical pain. Some pain is manageable, some pain is not. So it depends on its effect. But what's critical is that we be honest with ourselves. Now, mind you, denial sometimes works, and is sometimes important. It's important to not always have to face the brunt of a situation. If there's a loss or a death, a measure of denial helps you buffer it. Then there comes the time to deal with it. That's why when you deal with someone who has issues, you don't always go for a full-out assault on their psyche. Sometimes people need that denial just to be able to manage. It's something that's not emphasized enough. But then you don't want to have over-denial to the point where you are ignoring and denying the situation to the point that it's affecting you and others in a negative way. So that's why it's critical to have a friend and a mentor. It could be a friend and a mentor, or it could be two separate individuals. Someone that's a little more friendly, meaning more a peer, as in P-E-E-R, or someone more authoritative that you respect. What's the point? To get objective perspective. An objective perspective. So just make sure that you're not either overreacting or underreacting. And these are tools that we're able to access. Now, someone may argue, I have trust issues because part of my experiences have caused me to distrust, as we shall discuss. So I can't find a friend. I can't find a mentor. Well, it's critical to find one. As much as you distrust, you have to find someone that is loyal to you. It could be a family member. It could be a stranger. Because without it, you are then left to your own resources, which can be completely blinded and prejudiced by your experiences. Okay. Now, as I said, it could be biological and chemical. It can be family-oriented, meaning either something that we inherit, which is also a form of biological, but that is specifically from family. So something running in the family that may affect you. It could be family attitudes, where behavior of the family impacts a child in a very young, impressionable age. And then it could be life experiences like traumas and abuses, especially at a younger age, again, that alters something. That is like a wound. So therefore, that natural flow, that natural ups and downs, that natural pulsating energy has now been disrupted some way. So of course, it's going to be disrupted in both directions. It may not allow you to have those ups, and it may create much deeper downs, the mountains and the valleys. Or other ways that it disrupts, in the sense that it can become a haunting memory, a haunting part of our lives that doesn't allow us to really function well. And even if we cover it up, and even if we bury it, it can come up years later. And especially when our emotions begin to be active. When you interact with someone in an emotional relationship, then suddenly old wounds can emerge, because now you're not just dealing with a business partner. You're not just dealing with an employer or employee or clients. You're dealing with your emotions. Then it can come up, and all the trust issues. So the natural state of a person is that there's trust. Because the natural state of a person is also that there's love. And there's attachment. And there's protection. We're all, for 9 months in our mother's womb, completely protected. That's our natural state. As long as we're protected and we feel that security, there's trust. But if something has been breached, a trust has been breached, a loyalty has been betrayed, something has been violated, that's when that wound begins to affect also our trust. Can we trust the people that we thought we could trust? And then once those doubts begin to linger, so as you grow, you start looking at everybody that way. Not necessarily to the extreme. For some it's extreme, for some it's mild. That is almost like, initially, in our healthy state, everybody's innocent until proven guilty, but now everyone's guilty until proven innocent, because we have already had an experience that has hurt us. Now this can happen later in life as well. Promises that were broken, dreams shattered, relationships that have been severed, different forms of betrayal and violations and infidelities. So there are many factors that impact us on a deeper level. And here too, we have to know whether the intervention is necessary. Because if indeed it's only on a surface level, perhaps it's something we should ignore and we shouldn't be so sensitive to. But there are things that we are more sensitive to. Obviously, our discussion here is when it's something that should be addressed. Coping with mental health challenges. So now that we've established a certain base of the process, something healthy, been flowing a certain way, and then something comes in the way and impedes that flow. Very similar to how it is, let's say, the blood rushing through our arteries. So everything is going smoothly in a healthy person, then something happens, an injury, an illness, an accident, something chemical, something within, a clot, that impedes that flow. That's when you need intervention. So think of exactly the same thing on the psychic level. Psychic meaning the spiritual, psychological, spiritual, emotional level. That there's abnormal flow, and there are ups and downs there, that pulsating action. But then something gets in the way. Now, very often, if it's not contained, meaning nipped in the bud and addressed, often it begins to create collateral damage. For example, if you don't address it, it starts impacting how you react to things. Those reactions in turn write a narrative for your life. And now your life is not just what happened to you, it's also how it's impacted things. People stop trusting you. You become unpredictable yourself. What's happening is that the initial wound, or if it's chemical or biological, an ongoing impact is affecting other things. So if it was, of course, humanly possible, the first thing is to contain. Just like if somebody's rushed to an emergency room, the first thing is you have to stop the bleeding and clear up the issue, see what's the root of the issue, contain it there, and don't let it create collateral damage and spilling over to other parts of our lives. But that's not usually easy to do because we're not that clear about it ourselves. So by the time we start addressing it, often it's already spread. The fire has already spread. The infection, we'll call it the psychological infection, whether it's natural or acquired, has now already become a bigger part of our lives. But whenever you do become aware of it, you still want to contain. It doesn't have to be worse than it is initially. It's like a fire. There's a fire burning, fine. Let's figure out to contain it. Let's not make sure it doesn't spread. But unfortunately it does, and also, especially in our relationships with others. So critical, whenever you are able to, you come to that point, you want to contain it. So that's yet another aspect. Again, something that's not appreciated enough. I've seen this in many families. At a certain age, let's say 20 years old, somebody is diagnosed with bipolar. God forbid, tragic. What happens next? So there's treatment for this, there are medications, there are therapy, and it could be pretty much contained. I know many people living bipolar and they're living very healthy, normal lives. Do they have challenges? Yes, but they contain it. They're not in denial. They're addressing it. But remember, it's impacted also family members. How do siblings address it? How do parents address it? How do others? Especially in the initial stages, before it's been controlled, we all react very strongly. Or we escape from it. And both of them are not healthy. Because very often the family members don't go for help. They either avoid it or they're terrified of it. So this leads me to the stigma. I just gave that example. It could be, I think, the stigma aspect. The stigma is a tremendous force in this whole process. The stigma we ourselves have to mental health issues and the stigma others have. And that doesn't help the situation. Because the stigma becomes another problem as an extension, another collateral aspect that grows out of it. So it's critical, and that's where professionals come in, and the truth is anyone who wants to be familiar with this needs to eliminate the stigma. For example, if somebody has a cut or another physical injury, it's a bad thing, but there's no stigma related to it. Here there's a stigma. What's the matter with this person? Mental health has that reaction, and it makes sense because it affects behavior, it affects something more at the core than a superficial injury. When I say superficial, I don't mean it could be a big injury, but it's superficial in the sense it doesn't affect the very inner core of what defines us as human beings. If a person sometimes they behave in a strange way, in a bizarre way, it's embarrassing. There's a lot of shame involved. So the stigma and shame come together, both for the individual and the people around them, family and friends and others, and that doesn't help. Because then we start walking on eggshells. Are we helping the person? Patronizing? Ignoring? Denying? So you need to speak to someone here too. Mentors, friends are necessary. Confidentially, to protect everyone's interests. But need to speak to someone to make sure that you're dealing with it right. Because how we deal with affects the person who has that mental health issue. Okay, so those are some of the, I call the ABCs necessary when you're dealing with mental health challenges. But I want to now go to the next step, is to the deeper forces at work here. What is going on? So as I mentioned, life, a healthy life, is a particular type of movement. It's constant movement. And there are mechanisms at work. All technology actually copies those mechanisms. A camera is the copy of a human eye. An airplane is copying a bird. The dynamics turned into, on a machine level, trying to emulate the way it is in nature. So what exactly is this movement going on? It's, as I mentioned before, it's a natural flame within us. That is the healthy thing for a human being, is to have an element of tension, of angst, healthy measure, that motivates us. Because without it, we wouldn't grow. And since the purpose of existence is for us to transform the world around us, we need to react to it. And we need to be motivated. And we need to be driven. That's the tension part, the rotzei. But then tension alone, especially if it gets extreme, can be debilitating. So you need the resolution, the shuv, the integration, the internalization. So there's the motivation. You look up at the horizon, you want to reach. You look up and establish goals, you want to grow. But then you need to do something in that direction to actually grow. So it's like climbing a ladder. You see a step above you, so you move one level up. You can't move too many steps, too many rungs at once, but you move one. Then your bottom leg moves to the next rung. So in a step-by-step progressive process, you're growing, you're elevating. The same thing as intellectual curiosity. You read something, you learn something, you're intrigued, you're curious for more. So you explore. In the beginning, it's a horizon that you have not yet conquered or mastered. And then when you get there, you want to internalize it. You want to own it in some way. You never really own it, but you want to internalize it. And then the process continues. The horizons continue to expand as you grow. So this is true both on the psychological, the emotional, and behavioral level. That's the healthy human being. And that's why it's so much part of it. However, as we said, there may be factors that can impede or somewhat corrupt the process. And that's when you have the challenges. And as I said, we want to nip it in the bud, contain it as much as possible, get the right support, objective support, and make sure there's no collateral damage. And address it. Okay. So once you have that approach, that attitude, so now let's talk about this deeper part of what is really going on. There used to be a statement, I don't know if this is still said, there's a thin line between madness and genius. Today the word madness isn't really used, definitely not medically, but it was a form of state, it's just using it just as a descriptive term of that is not the norm. A genius is usually also not the norm. So why is there a thin line between the two? Because there's a partition, you can say a filter, a regulator between our superconscious and our conscious. I've spoken about this a few months ago. We had a whole series on how consciousness is born. Between the superconscious and the conscious, because so far what we've spoken about is the conscious state. But remember, everything originates in a place behind the curtain, behind the partition. So there's a channel between the two. That channel is what regulates how much so-called awareness we are going to have. For a genius, those channels are a little wider, so it flows more, the creative juices. For a regular person, it's a little narrower. For a mad person, someone that's experiencing some form of mental health challenge, it's also going to be expanded. Interestingly, that's why you'll find that geniuses and mad people can be very close to each other, very thin line, if it goes over too much. Imagine your superconscious opening up just like a faucet breaks, and there's no more regulation, and there's so much energy flowing into you. What will it do? It will overwhelm all our circuits. So it's critical to have that balance. When we say a chemical imbalance, essentially, it's saying that the compartments are blurred. And the compartments are necessary. Just an example. When a person experiences some form of grief, God forbid. So we all know the initial shock, the initial pain, and there's a process. There's the cathartic process of healing. At some point, in time, the memory begins to fade. When I say the memory, not that the event fades, but that initial intensity, the initial trauma, the initial grief begins to fade. What does that mean, it begins to fade? You can access it, you can remember it. It means the compartments of your chemical system are learning to put it into a closet, so to speak, which can be accessed, and sometimes is accessed when we don't even want it to be accessed. Something triggers it. In some way, it's compartmentalized. And that's why you can live your life and be very happy, even though something of deep grief. And someone will say to you, didn't you experience that grief? Yes, it's part of my life. It never goes away, but I've learned to walk around it, so to speak. These are the compartments. Now, if the compartments break down, what is going to happen? A person will be constantly overcome with the same grief because they can't get over it. And the same is true with depression and with anxiety and with stress and distress. All of it has to be compartmentalized. Part of what we spoke earlier about containing it. But understanding this dynamic is critical. Because what's happening is that the regular mental health where everything is balanced is now being challenged. Something's happened. The compartments have been affected. And this again can be biological, chemical, hereditary, or due to life experiences, traumas and abuse, and so on. So when you understand this process, what you really want to do is regulate that. That's why at times you may need medication. What does medication do? It somewhat balances out the chemicals that they should be more effective. It doesn't solve the problem, but it makes it easier. If the stress is up there 100%, it can get it down to 80%, 50%, whatever the numbers are. And the same thing with other reactions. It's a chemical that's countering the chemicals or triggering the proper chemicals within your system. Therapy and conversation with mentors, with friends, and with professionals, what does that do? That helps also create an equilibrium, becoming aware of what's going on, eliminating the stigma and shame as much as possible, finding ways to empower you. So all that is part of the process of trying to rebalance, recalibrate an unbalanced situation. So it's important to know that dynamic because that's what you want. And that's why it's critical to have help of others because it's very hard to diagnose yourself. It's very hard to define. And even if you can, it's very hard to live up to all the things you need to do because sometimes you need that outside motivation. But let's finally talk about one final thing, which is countering it all. So in addition to anything I said earlier, clinical that needs medication or needs professional assistance or therapy, let me introduce to you something I've been talking about, especially recently, to the spiritual spa. Just as the body needs good diet, sleep, exercise, hygiene, and all the things that make a body healthy, the soul also needs the same, the psyche. And I'm using psyche and soul interchangeably. The spirit also needs nourishment. So as we discussed earlier, mental health is essentially psychological, emotional, and behavioral. So we have the three pillars, acronym SPA, S-P-A, study, prayer, action, S-P-A. With the first, study, dealing with the cognitive, immersing your mind in something that's more transcendent. That's getting your mind into another place. So no matter what you're experiencing in life, any stress, any anxiety, any fear, any insecurity, every day, take a few minutes, but on a schedule, consistently, not sporadically, and make sure your mind is consumed with something transcendent. Spiritual teaching. Allow yourself to submerge your mind into something beyond your immediate reality, something on a cosmic level. What does that do? It's not just a distraction, which it also is, but it just elevates that part of the mind which sometimes can be so preoccupied and consumed with different levels of stress or anxiety or other challenges that we may have, is now, at least for these few minutes, being submerged in something greater. So it's cleansing, it's purifying, it's clearing up blocks. Is it an automatic pressing a button? It's not a magic pill, but it's one part of the regimen. Number 2, P, So we'll call that cognitive conditioning. Number 2, P, prayer. Prayer is emotional conditioning. Since mental health is also about emotions, feelings, moods. So what's an emotional positive force that counters that? Prayer. Prayer means service of the heart. Allowing yourself to emote in a healthy way. That can be a prayer. I often suggest that morning prayer when you wake up, right upon awakening. Thank you for returning my soul to me. But not just as an intellectual, philosophical idea on a cognitive level. Emotionally, thank you, gratitude. That emotional feeling of thank you for giving me life. Yes, it may be a challenging life, but thank you. Thank you for making me feel that I'm alive. Thank you for giving me an indispensable mission that I and only I can accomplish. It can be a poem, it can be a song, anything that stimulates and triggers your emotional muscles. And finally, 3, A of the SPA, action. So that's that cognitive conditioning, emotional conditioning, now action, behavioral conditioning. Act. So just like I said before about the cognitive with the study, prayer also should be on a regular basis every day. Now comes action. Every day the same thing. Take upon yourself something, an act, a random act of kindness. Giving charity, have a charity box in your room, in your office. Reach out to somebody. Offer them help, whether it's monetary help or time or advice, helping them get a job, helping them have a conversation. There are many ways we can express an action. What does action do that the first two don't? It brings it home. It's in the material world. It's tangible. It's not just cognitive and emotional. I don't want to say just, because that's extremely important, especially in the mental health state. Mental health condition. But it adds that element that really drives it home. Try it out. These 3 things, and this is frankly for everyone. Even if your mental health is perfect, we still need to have a good diet. We still need to have good exercise, good regimens, good behavior to maintain health. So it's good for everyone. Try it out every day. The cognitive conditioning, the emotional, and the behavioral. And you tell me what happens. Those are the 3 most powerful ways to counter any challenges, but also to enhance our health, because we're immersing ourselves in things that are not about me. Me. It's serving. It's giving off light. It's empowering you to feel that you have something to contribute. And on all levels, the mind, the emotions, the feelings, and the behavior, which is the essence of what mental health is about. And what it's really doing is also drawing from the superconscious state into the conscious, only empowering it, and strengthening it, fortifying it. So this is a topic, of course, that deserves a lot more than what I've just dedicated this last short while. But I think this touches upon some of the core elements, and I'd love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your comments, critique. And above all, please share. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And please share with your friends. Pay it forward. This has been Simon Jacobson, Meaningful Life Center, meaningfullife.com, where you can find a full array of materials, video, audio, text, that address every aspect, the spectrum of our cognitive, emotional, and behavioral lives, how to live more meaningfully, more productively, more purposefully, and fulfilling your calling in this world. Because above all, we want to be that healthy flame that's flickering, that's restless, but a healthy restlessness. That's what we want to reclaim, not just damage control, not just to eliminate the demons and the dark forces, but also to allow the light that we were born with to shine forth and transform our sphere of influence and beyond. Thank you so much, and be well.
This program is brought to you by the Meaningful Life Center. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at meaningfullife.com/donate.